Today in this English episode of the IoT Use Case Podcast, a true insider in OPC UA talks about developments and challenges of this very relevant standard. With Casa Mendes Gonçalves, we have a Portuguese company from the food and beverage industry that is ambitiously underway on their digitalization journey with all the related challenges. And they share their learnings and also successes very openly. Our guests today are Jouni Aro, the CTO from the Finnish company Prosys OPC and member of the advisory council of the OPC Foundation, and Luís Estriga, head of automation, and Vasim Tana, automation engineer from the company Casa Mendes Gonçalves. How do you think the collaboration works between a Portuguese and a Finnish company? Let's find out. Hello and welcome. And today a special bon dia for this episode of the IoT Use Case Podcast. I'm your podcast co-host, Dr. Peter Schopf, your favorite substitute for Madeleine Mickeleit, who is having a very special project for the next months. Not the digital twins we talk about quite often, but real twins, so an entirely different set of challenges she will face. But before we our guests, we introduce ourselves more in detail. Luís, why should the listeners tune in until the end of today?
Hey everyone, I'm Luís Estriga, working for Casa Mendes Gonçalves, and I'm based in Portugal. I think you should tune in for today's podcast because there's some exciting technical details going on regarding OPC and digitalization of the industry. So we'll probably address AI as well at the end. So you should really tune in for this podcast today.
Great. And then we have Vasim. From your point of view, what do you want to share today?
I think the most important is to talk a little bit about this relationship that we had with Prosys and how we developed the whole solution internally with their help and with the support. As Luís mentioned, we have some interesting projects going on, and most importantly related to AI, data monetization, and the ease of getting all of this data across all of the machines on the factory. So we're going to share some interesting topics today with you guys. Hopefully the listeners would enjoy.
Perfect. And then Jouni, last but not least, what do you want to share?
Yeah, well, I've been a CTO at Prosys OPC for 20 to 30 years, and we've been working on OPC UA for most of this time. So I would just like to emphasize on the fancy parts of OPC UA that most people still haven't been able to use, but just concentrate on what OPC UA can enable in the long term, not just as a communication protocol, but something much more.
Yeah, and then let's start with you as well, talking about Prosys as a company and you as a person. I mean, you've been with the OPC UA Foundation as an advisor for quite some time, so that is quite interesting, to be really close to that important aspect of digital transformation in factories. So maybe you can talk a little bit about yourself and where you're located currently, your company.
Yeah, so we're located in Finland, next to the Aalto University, which is technical university background of most of the people that work here. And the company just celebrated 30 years. And I also joined around the same time that I was finishing my studies. And we started working on a better future for automation industry in general, bringing the best software development practices to the automation software development. And then OPC came along actually around the same time as and we started taking benefit of that. And somehow we continued that journey all these years and therefore became also very close to the OPC Foundation, which has now worked 20 years with the OPC UA standardization. Before that, there was the OPC Classic. That's like the strong basis for all that development. But you could imagine that the OPC Foundation has been hosting working groups for all these 20 years, and they meet every week and improve the standard, which is trying to cover. Some people think that it's trying to cover too much, but if you think about the industrial automation, there is a lot of topics that need to be resolved, and the more you can standardize that, the better. And that's been our mission as well, to help the industry to take advantage of this fantastic technology. You can think that in future, if everything is kind of ready for the standard, then you can start thinking about higher ideas, like, for example, semantic interoperability instead of just communication interoperability.
I mean, that is also some commitment because you have like at Prosys OPC, you have the OPC already in your name of the company. That is quite a dedication, I would say. How would you reply to somebody, if I might challenge you a little bit, when I would say, well, OPC, isn't that just a protocol? What would you say?
The reason why people think like this is because in OT, we tend to think that we need data from devices and machines, and you just need some kind of a protocol that you can communicate with these machines. And traditionally, it's been a lot of legacy vendor-specific communication technologies that have taken in place. And the original mission of OPC was to standardize that so that we don't need to understand all those vendor-specific protocols. And there are a lot of successful products that convert all kinds of protocols to OPC and OPC UA. And that's been very successful. But the thing is that we haven't really got much further from that. Also, the mission of OPC UA especially was even take things higher and not just be another communication protocol, but put together everything related to industrial automation. Speaking of just current measurements, which are exchanged through this basic protocol like tag-based communication, but then bringing in events, alarms, historical access, and then on top of this, all kinds of information models that are more domain-specific. So that's the basic advantage of OPC UA, that you could model your devices, your procedures, your systems, and when these are standardized, then we can also make machines interoperable with high-level applications. But unfortunately, most products and the market are still concentrating on the basic level of communication and enabling communication level standardization, whereas I always would like to talk about high-level communication and high-level standardization.
One last question in terms of OPC UA before we go into the application phase with then our other guests. When there are so many members as well, I mean, there are more than 1,000 members, there's lots of interest, probably lots of interest groups that are related to that. How fast is the development? You said there are working groups every week, but can you come up with decisions fast enough for the market for the market requirements to be addressed? Or how would you say that is progressing? And into what direction is it progressing currently?
I think the industry is having a lot of different requirements, requests. And in fact, we see a lot of organizations that are looking at OPC UA as the solution for them. We can talk about the Open Process Automation Forum. We can talk about module type package defined by NAMUR and Profibus organization. And there's a lot of different challenges that the industry is facing. And then in Germany, especially, we have VDMA that has been concentrating on information modeling for different domains. And that's where most of these new requirements come to OPC UA, and especially related to the information modeling part. And in fact, the standard is moving forward quite fast, quite far, but then it boils down to the end users really needing these features, and then the products getting these features available so that we can take advantage of everything that the standard is providing. So that's where the main challenge is, that the standard is further and gives high promises, and therefore we also see people disappointed when they cannot still use all these features that have been standardized. But that's the reality, that the products are always lagging behind and the market is lagging behind. And that's why all this development takes decades instead of years in practice, that we get everything in place in the factories. So to say that the standard is already enabling much more than many of the products. And that's why we have this new product that we will talk about later as well.
Very good. Yeah, so then let's come to the market and to specific requirements, because I think I'm happy to hear that the standard is already providing more, and it is not the standard that is the bottleneck, but rather kind of implementing it also with products. Luís, you have a very interesting company in Portugal. Can you talk about yourself and your company? What are you doing? And potentially already, why did you decide to start digitalization? What was the initial force of motivation for you?
Yeah, so I've been working for Mendes Gonçalves for the past 5 years now. Mendes Gonçalves has been in the market for around 40 years now, producing sauces like ketchup, mayonnaise, mustard, all these kind of things that you see every day in the supermarket. We produce hot sauces as well and some other different projects to clean. When I joined back then in 2020, about 5 years ago, there was little software with one machine that we were collecting data. We were outsourcing it to a provider. It was not really what we were looking for because it was really manual. We had to fix and configure every single detail, and then we have all these other machines communicating in their own dialect. And we found it was quite hard for us to integrate new machines in this solution more than a year ago. When Vasim joined, we decided, why don't we develop our own software, our own solution? So that's what we did. We started to look into the market to see the solutions that were there for us to use. We tried quite a few ones, and then we got to Prosys. When we tested, we had no doubts this is exactly what we wanted. This is what we were looking for. We were not looking for a solution that was right away 100% fail-proof. But what made us choose, in this case, Prosys, was the support and that openness to meet with us, to check what we need. And we are implementing each day more and more machines, more and more data into our solution. We are collecting around 500 data points each minute. So that's a lot of data already. And basically, the main goal for this is just to cut costs, to optimize our factory and take their decisions based on data, pretty much.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on basically how you looked into the market? Because I could imagine that many also listeners, they are in similar position. Yeah, they have some solutions which are maybe not yet satisfying and they need to start looking for something else, a more structured way of doing things. So how did you go about it? Did you kind of add more talks and conversations, or did you have a plan kind of with criteria that you rated different companies? Can you talk a little bit more about this journey until you get to Prosys OPC?
Yeah, so basically we were looking for a solution that were not super expensive, and there are some super expensive solutions in the market. There's some solutions that are plug and play, but we have no control. So we wanted to develop our own dashboards. We are using Grafana as well. We were looking for something that was stable. We were looking for a partnership that we felt that was close to us, if you know what I mean.
And that's interesting that you say close, yeah, because you work with a Finnish company and you sit in Portugal. I thought this was very, very interesting. Like from my stereotype of thinking, yeah, you would say that the Finnish and the Portuguese would be somehow different. And you confirmed several times that you are very collaborative, working very good together. And I'm happy to hear that. So Vasim, maybe you can address this topic also. Like, how is this interaction with the Finnish guys, basically? And then more specifically, what have been your highlights in now addressing this topic?
Well, definitely the most important thing for me is the support that we received from Prosys. As Luís said, I have been working at Casa Mendes Gonçalves for 1 year as an automation engineer as well. So it is actually my first experience and interaction with the market and with all of these technologies. And within this year, as we were searching for the right protocol, we contacted many different providers and we got this idea right away that this seems right. This is not the perfect, but we can work with this, and the support they gave all of the time was really on point. So we decided to go on and explore with them, and we got to the point where we became super comfortable and we started even suggesting enhancements or even reporting, auto-reporting. Whenever we find something is not well, or where if there was a small problem, we would right away do a small report by email, or we would just send the log files of the errors, and right away they would help us and try to understand what's going on. The support team is even better than the OPC solution.
Yeah, that's great. I think this interaction is really important for such an early phase when you enter into these uncharted waters of digitalization, right? And did you have any highlights yet in your daily production where you say, hey, this insights we did not have before or could not share with our colleagues in the shop floor? What has been kind of happening there?
We have many of these situations. For example, one of the main products of our factory is vinegar. And we produce somewhere between 90, 80 to 100 tons of vinegar every day.
Mm-hmm.
And the vinegar yard is the oldest part of the factory. And that's how the factory started actually 30, 40 years ago. And that part, since it has old equipment, it was quite difficult to modernize the data monitoring and visualization process. So we created various dashboards using Grafana with the data that Prosys OPC helped us to obtain. And the integration was really simple. And whoever is in the industry and works at factories and in automation, they can understand how difficult it is to connect to old equipment into modern solutions. Considering that, it was quite an easy task. Once we got this data from the machineries, old ones and new ones, we were able to associate alerts completely for free within Teams or within any other applications that we have. So just getting this data is the main challenge. Once we have the data, we can do whatever we want with it. And another example is monitoring the consume of the factory, electrical, water, vapor, gas. We were never able to know how much we consume until we get the bills at the end of the month. However, once we got the data, not we only were able to know how much we consume, we were able to prevent leakage, accidents, or any dangerous situations. Once we notice that there is an excess of electrical consume in one place, or there is an excess of gas or water consume. And one situation that we had was in the compressed air. We noticed once we got the data and we were visualizing the data on Grafana, we noticed that every Saturday and Sunday we had an excess in air consume. And we're like, doesn't make sense because these two zones are not working on Saturday and Sunday. So what's happening? Upon small investigation, we understood that the operators, the machine operators, they just did not close the valve of the air. So the compressed air, they left it open on a Friday when they were going back home. So it was as simple as that. We were able to save 28,000 euros per year just because of the amount of air that was being leaked into the production lines while they're not producing. So that's one clear example of how obtaining data can help reduce a lot of costs, make the work environment safer. The most important here, though, is not just to obtain the data, is to obtain the data easily and efficiently. Because if you have a solution where you can obtain data, but it's always failing, it's not efficient, it's difficult to use, then it's going to end up complicating the whole process. However, with Prosys, it was quite simple integration. Even the manual, I would say, and that's another thing responding to your other question, the manual was one of the easiest manuals I've ever interacted with, like the guide, how to install, how to configure the node, how to configure the communications, the IPs. It was straightforward. It was not 200 plus pages manual. It was direct, straightforward. Do this, step 1, step 2, step 3, and you're done.
This boiling down into simple aspects and topics is very important. Yeah, what you described with the leakage, for example. Often when you talk about how we need to obtain data and we need to invest in transparency, but what's the business case? And it's difficult to calculate very often because such aspects, such incidents, such insights, you cannot really calculate. Yeah, it's just happening. And it's one of these, we talked sometimes about little gold nuggets. Yeah, you need to find a lot of gold nuggets and then you have your handful gold, because normally the silver bullet, like the big chunk of gold, is not there. Yeah, it's lots of different insights and optimizations that is possible on based of stable data. And I like also the simple manual. So Jouni, in terms of what is your solution, can you explain a little bit more what you have employed there at Casa Mendes Gonçalves? What has been the product and maybe the advantages, but also the challenges that you still see, because obviously the support is still required. Yeah, so it's not only plug and play while it's still easy. So what are still the little challenges that are discussed in these day-to-day collaborations.
What we're talking about is Prosys OPC UA Forge, which is still a rather new application that we brought into the market a couple of years ago. The challenge has still been in the industry to see that we get products in the market that would take advantage of these advanced OPC UA features, like information modeling, enabling all the security features. So after looking for good solutions, we couldn't really find any good enough and decided to make our own. So the main idea with Forge originally was to enable the industry to start using information models before they can use them within PLCs, within machines, within different systems, to enable integration of different machines to high-level systems, like, for example, MES systems. That was our original idea, I would say. But it turned out that we were a little bit ahead of time still. Their main challenge is to be able to see all the data they have in their production process and make that available in one single place. I think this relates to the discussion that people are having these days about unified namespace, which is a great idea, trying to simplify the complexity of different industrial automation systems, factories that have a lot of data available, but it's scattered around in different applications, different systems, different machines that use a lot of data for their own purposes to do the certain part of the control, do the certain part of the machine functionality, but it's very difficult to put all that information together. And I discussed with a lot of companies over the last 5 to 10 years who have this challenge that they maybe bought a lot of factories around the world, and each factory is completely different. Even if they produce the same stuff, they do it with different applications, different machinery, and it's very difficult to standardize their own processes. So how can you do that? Now, basically, OPC UA would enable streamlining and standardizing how you communicate from any machine to the MES. But the products in the market don't enable that still today. And unified namespace is also like an idea that you can put everything together in a nice hierarchical fashion where you can find all your data of your production, and then you can easily create solutions on top of that to understand what's happening in your factory, and then be able to pinpoint these kind of problems that might exist there easily. Okay, it sounds easy, but it's actually really complicated to accomplish because of the multitude of different systems and applications and even different communication protocols. But that's the big challenge that we are facing. But we wanted to create the modern solution that is based on OPC UA 100%. So the core of the application is an OPC UA server, and we bring in information from everywhere to that same one OPC UA server. It's called an aggregation server. So it aggregates data from different underlying systems. And then within Forge, you can manipulate that data. You can raise the level of your opportunities to handle data, and then also convert it to higher level semantical information, what you need when you need to take advantage of the OPC UA information models. But now we've noticed most of the customers that have been really happy with the performance, really happy with what our Forge enables for them, have still had all kinds of minor issues that are the real challenges, and we just have to work with them to improve and enable those as well within the application.
I would have so many questions in terms of how you exactly implement and the different challenges around it and the different possibilities. However, looking at the time, we probably need to a little bit now come to an end with, however, your perspective, Luís. I would be very interested. How do you want to continue developing also the automation space? What are next steps and what is the vision?
Obviously, there's no way around AI, I think, in our opinion. So at the beginning of this year, we already started to look into a solution of AI, also developed 100% internally with the help, obviously, of Forge OPC. on collecting the data, but the AI part will be developed by us internally. We started to test some solutions, and now we are getting there eventually. By the end of the year, we already should have a chatbot working. So every operator can use it. Every engineer can ask questions to our chatbot regarding our data. And in the future, maybe next year, we plan to cross different types of data like water consumptions, what we produce in our production lines, what electricity we are consuming, and cross that data and try to get some things that is not possible to see by the naked eye, so to speak, hopefully. That's our plan, at least for next year.
Sounds great. I also think that these generative AI solutions, I mean, generative AI within an industrial setting is not as easy to implement because of reliability topics, but for sure, like this coaching in terms of troubleshooting and else and making knowledge accessible, I think that's a very good way to go. So lots of interesting insights from my perspective. I would give you now all the last word, basically, in terms of what you still want to address, what you want to share with the audience. And thank you already very much for sharing these insights and these interesting topics. Vasim, do you want to start?
Well, I think maybe the audience might want to know more interesting use cases. So I can give a few more extra examples. Something in the industrial level is the alerting. So for any problems, any conditions. So in our factory, we have different equipments that are constantly being monitored by the quality team, such as the cooling chambers, where we have our raw materials, eggs, tomatoes, since we are in the food industry. So, and the temperature, monitoring the temperature all of the time is quite an important factor. With the older system, we had this issue where the system would go down and then we have to manually restart it. And then we will be able to receive the alerts. Sometimes there would be these bugs where the alert is going on, but the conditions are okay. So we were able to completely pass over that. And with the solution that we created is that we have this data. We're reading the data from the cooling chamber sensors each minute. And we're associating alerts on Grafana, which is also open source. Then we were able to get these alerts completely for free in real time. Well, not completely for free because we're still paying for the Prosys OPC at a much reduced cost because we're not paying for each SMS. And we have around 16 cooling chambers. We did the same for the vinegar. So for the fermentation process, the temperature is quite important. It needs to be between 28 to 30 degrees Celsius to 33 degrees Celsius. More than that, higher than that, or lower, the bacteria would die for the fermentation. And then all of a sudden you have around 10 or 20 tons of vinegar that you cannot do anything with it anymore. So monitoring this is quite important. Again, we were able to do that in terms of monitorization. Before, the operators, they actually had to be in the factory. So basically, if something happens during a weekend, if there is a problem, the machine is not working, or any simple error, they would have to leave their houses, go to the factory, and see what's going on the HMI of the machine itself. Now, we have dashboards. They just need to connect to their VPN from their houses, from their phones, or whatever, and they can monitorize and see what is actually going on in real time, obviously minute to minute. We can reduce that. We can do it to 30 seconds in 30 seconds. Though for our industry, for our machinery, we thought the lowest interval is 1 minute. So we're getting data every minute. This is another example of what we're doing with the data we're obtaining. Another example is the part of analyzing a lot of data. So we have a lot of data from the machines that are, some of them even working 16, 20 hours per day. So eventually at the end of the month, to analyze all of that, you have to download an Excel. Within the Excel, you have to create your own graphs, etc. So we were able to do that by just one click within Grafana. So we saved a lot of time for our engineers, for our operators, any team who wants to manipulate or use this data. They already have it. They don't need to download it by themselves. They don't need to extract it in any other form. They have it there. They just apply any time filter they want. They choose how they want to monitorize the data, and voila, it's right there. So these are a few examples. I can go on, but we don't have to.
Yeah. Unfortunately, time is an issue. So, but still great. Thanks a lot for these examples. And Luís, your last words.
Yes. As a final takeaway for everyone listening is just start. That's it, just start. Because in industrial digitalization, waiting for the perfect system design or the perfect tools or the perfect timing only leads to stagnation. So you will never start. So real progress doesn't come from planning the ideal architecture on paper, just like we said before. It comes from connecting the first devices, validating the first data points, learning as you go, basically. And if you look into the market or into the industry, like every mature digital factory that you see today, as an example, start with small steps, like a few sensors, a basic OPC setup, simple dashboards. And from there, the system basically evolved. The team base gained insights, identified problems, improved cycle after cycle, and you will discover what really needs to be fixed or optimized once the data starts flowing. If you never begin, nothing will change. But once you take the first steps, the path forward becomes very clear.
Thanks. Jouni.
Yeah, I thought I still mentioned semantic modeling. It doesn't sound very fancy, but what is semantics? It's the words and meanings we give to different things. I like to say that when we talk about AI, that you cannot be very clever if you don't know what you're talking about. So when we define the semantic models and put AI working on top of that, there's much more chance of getting something meaningful out than just putting AI on top of plain data that nobody knows what it is. That's where OPC UA, in my opinion, has a high promise that by standardizing semantic models and semantics within the industry, that can enable a strong basis for successful AI algorithms as well.
And that's a great point. I mean, semantic modeling would merit an episode by itself. Just to go into details there and to better discuss that. But I think it was very great. So thanks for your insights and all the best for your continuous digitalization journey, and all the best to the listeners. Hear you in the next episode.